Zenith 8H832 Restoration Part 1. Inspection and Disassembly. Last week I picked up this lovely little Zenith tabletop radio I had been watching on Craigslist. The ad stated that the set worked and that the seller was moving and couldn't take it with them. The radio was in Copperopolis, a remote little mining town in Calaveras County here in Northern California. The remote location prompted me to ignore the set for quite some time, but when I saw the price drop down to $20, I contacted the seller and asked if they ever journeyed into Sacramento. I work in Sacramento, so a meetup there would have been perfect for me. The seller replied that they were never in Sacramento, but that if I came down and got the radio, it would be free. How could I resist? I made plans the following week to drive down right after work and pick up the set. It was a 2-hour drive from my work to get the radio and another hour to get back home, so while very tiring, it was definitely a worthwhile trip. I'm really actually quite smitten with this radio. It's newer than what I generally tend to collect. My collecting focus is centered on the 1930s to about 1940, and this is a 1948 model year set. So, I like the minimalist styling of the set and the looks of the dial. And by all accounts, the performance of this radio is supposedly really good. It's an 8-tube tabletop radio with twin 5.25-inch speakers. And it's got some interesting coverage. It covers the AM broadcast band, which on this radio goes from 540 to 1620 kilocycles. And it covers what they call FM 45 and FM 100, the old school FM band at 42 megacycles to 48.5 megacycles, as well as the traditional FM band from 88 to 108 megacycles. It also features the Zenith Radiogram tone control system switches on the outboard sides of the dial escutcheon. Radiogram is short for radio organ, which is reminiscent of the controls that one sees on an organ. Those controls switch in various components into the first AF stage to alter the tone of the audio. It's a decent system for changing the tone quality, certainly a step above what a lot of other radios of the period offered, but the biggest downside of the system are the switches themselves. They're horrible little cheaply made things which will definitely require a lot of cleaning and attention as we go forward with the restoration of the radio. Pulling the chassis out of the cabinet starts with knob removal. The 8H832's knobs are a press-on fit, so there are no set screws to worry about. I'm showing the process greatly sped up so as not to bore anybody to death. The two outboard knobs came off with moderate effort, but as you can see, the middle knob, the tuning knob, put up quite a bit of a fight. An old radioman's trick to getting a stubborn knob free is to wrap a piece of fabric around the knob. In this case, it's a strip from an old pair of my shorts which gave way when bending over. The fabric strip greatly increases the leverage one has to pull the knob. Once free, it became evident that this knob had given somebody else a bit of trouble in the past. The metal escutcheon was dented and dinged up fairly well around the knob behind it. It looks as if they used a screwdriver to pry and damaged the dial escutcheon in the process. From here, dial escutcheon removal requires the removal of 6 small wood screws, 2 of which are beneath the band switch and volume knobs. You can see I managed to find and remove those fairly quickly, but the other 4 screws are hidden beneath the Radiogram control escutcheons, so those must be removed first. You can see in the video that I eventually blunder my way through discovering this. The Radiogram control blocks are removed from the set by simply pushing them out from the rear of the set. Each control block is held in place by a spring clip. 2 1/4-inch hex head screws hold these spring clips and escutcheons to the Radiogram control block. After the Radiogram escutcheons and spring clips are removed, carefully push the Radiogram control blocks back into the radio and carefully set them down on top of the chassis so that they come out with the chassis when it is removed. It might not be a bad idea to tape them down so they don't flop around. The 4 remaining dial escutcheon wood screws are now visible and can be removed. Up next is removal of the fiberboard backing of the radio. This is held in place by 8 regular slotted wood screws. My radio's backing was split about 1/4 of the way up from the bottom at a weak spot. An AM band loop antenna is attached to the upper portion of the backing and is hardwired to a terminal strip on the right side of the radio chassis via 4 wires. I photographed these wires after cleaning the nicotine paint job and dust off of them in order to obtain their color coding for ID purposes. I cannot overstress the importance of taking pictures and videos of the set prior to beginning work. Past experiences have taught me that they can be invaluable in sorting out questions and even mistakes later on. It would be a tricky matter to have to suss out which of these 4 wires from the loop antenna went to which connection on the terminal strip without these visual aids. On the left side of the chassis is another terminal strip, and this is where the speakers connect. The speakers are the last item which have to be disconnected before the chassis can be removed. Here I am photographing the connections and then desoldering them. Turns out the gum rubber insulation on the wires disintegrated when moved, so I could have just snipped them. This radio, as we'll soon see, is filled with wires whose insulation is in a similar state of decay. With the cabinet on its side, we can see the 4 bolts which hold the chassis to the cabinet. These are a coarse pitch screw with a 1/4-inch hex head. It's too bad the ID sheet on the bottom of the set was torn. I'll have to see about finding another one to possibly replicate it. An interesting little Easter egg was revealed upon inspecting the bottom of the cabinet. I can see the words Sam's 52 scratched into the wood on the bottom. It's obvious that somebody has worked on the radio in the past and wanted to remember where the reference material was located. I had finally had enough of the power cord, which was a spliced-on thing anyway, and decided to give it the diagonal cutter treatment. Glad that's out of the way. I start by removing the 2 lower screws, and then place the cabinet horizontal again before removing the final 2 screws. I slide the chassis straight back, then up a little bit, and out she comes. Remember to be careful with the radiogram control blocks. I neglected to tape mine down, as you can see here, so they're just flopping about. The top of the chassis is covered in dust, grime, and the ubiquitous nicotine paint job. It's also evident that the 2 chassis-mounted electrolytics have been pulled and replaced with more modern Sprague units at some time in the past. Under chassis inspection reveals a mixed bag. On the one hand, I couldn't see any immediate evidence that any components besides the original electrolytic filter and cathode bypass capacitors had been replaced. On a negative note, somebody has sprayed a reddish material all over the underside of the chassis. I suspect this may be some sort of corona dope or some other manner of insulating coating. It was no doubt applied due to the crumbling of the original wire's insulation. It's looking like this radio is going to require a rewire and painstaking cleanup of that red menace that's been sprayed all over. I'm hoping the stuff isn't something like Formagasket or other intense adhesive type stuff. The cabinet is almost presentable. That reminds me of a girlfriend I used to have. Anyway, it has the usual character marks and scuffs that one would expect on a radio this old. The one big sore point is the top. The previous owner admitted to overwatering a houseplant which lived atop this radio. I'm not quite sure how I'll be addressing this water damage on the top, so I'll have to devote some thought to this. The speaker grill cloth clearly needs to be replaced as well. I don't think I'll be able to find an exact replacement, but I should be able to source a suitable replacement that fits the radio's character and styling. Inspection of the vacuum tube lineup revealed only 7 tubes present in the set. I don't see how it's possible that it could have worked, as it was advertised, without the missing 5Y3 rectifier tube, but that's okay. I never buy antique radios expecting them to work. Each and every radio I ever buy, I expect to have to do a certain amount of service on them, if not a complete restoration. This radio's tube lineup consists of 6 miniature 6-volt tubes for the standard duties one expects to see in a radio of this vintage. Nothing overtly fancy here. There's also 2 larger octal-based vacuum tubes, one being the 5Y3 GT rectifier, and the other being the single 6V6 power amplifier tube, which drives the 2 speakers. The audio power tube pulled from the set is a metal envelope 6F6 instead of the correct 6V6. Externally, this tube is quite charred. It reminds me of my prowess, or lack thereof, on the grill during the summertime. Burnt to a cinder. Anyway, these tubes typically do run hot, but this looks excessive to me. It'll be interesting to see how it tests. The miniature tubes pulled from this set are a mix and match collection of Zenith branded tubes and Sylvania branded replacements. The 6BE6 converter had been replaced with a 6BY6 at some point. This tube had a metallized cardboard tube slipped over it, presumably to prevent hum or interference. This cardboard tube was also cooked and was flaking apart. I'll be replacing the incorrect tubes with the proper ones and getting that all squared away in videos to come, as well as testing the existing tubes, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.